My name is Emily Tran. I'm 34. I'm a senior systems engineer. I work remotely from a small apartment above a bookstore in Cedar Falls, Iowa. I help design infrastructure for emergency medical supply chains. But last Saturday, at my nephew, Ethan's high school graduation party, I was introduced as just the aunt who works from home. They had banners, balloons, catering from a place that probably cost more than my rent. And there I was, standing by the drink table, holding a gift I paid for, listening to my mother say, Brian S. built such a successful family, and Emily, well, she's always done her own thing. Brian chuckled. He raised his glass and looked at Ethan. Here, S to never ending up in pajamas, eating leftovers in a one-bedroom apartment like Auntie M. Everyone laughed, hard. Even my dad gave one of those low grunts he calls a laugh. No one looked at me. No one noticed the flush in my cheeks, or the way I gripped the edge of the table to keep my hand from shaking. What they didn't know, what they never cared to ask, is that the first semester of Ethan's college tuition. I paid it, transferred through Mom's account because, in her words, it'd mean more coming from Brian. They also didn't know that I coded the supply chain tool that kept Ethan's city stocked with ventilators last winter. But I'm not the one with a white coat. I'm not the one with 3 kids and a lake house. I'm not seen. I left the party early, said I had a work emergency. The truth, I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. Not when every corner whispered, "You don't belong here." The next morning, I went to the regional depot to fix a data sync issue. Just another broken link in a system nobody sees unless it fails. And that's when I saw him. Julian Rivera, flannel shirt, hands covered in warehouse dust, calm eyes that had seen too much. We hadn't spoken in years, not since high school, but when he looked up and saw me, he didn't ask how I was, didn't comment on my hair or my job or whether I was still single. He just said, "I didn't expect to see you here." "System flagged a misroute," I said. "Figured I'd fix it myself." He nodded, then paused. Looked at me, not through me. "You've got that look," he said softly. "The one people get when they've been holding the whole damn thing together. Alone." I didn't answer, didn't need to. Because for the first time in a long time, someone actually saw me. If you've ever poured everything into people who never thanked you, if you've ever stood in a room full of family and felt like a guest in your own story, hit subscribe. Because the girl they laughed at, she's not staying invisible forever. They think I disappeared, that I checked out after college, that I never really made anything of myself. What they don't know is that I turned down a full PhD fellowship in Seattle. Because Dad had a stroke the week before I was supposed to leave, Mom was falling apart. Brian was overwhelmed with his own residency, so I stayed. I took night shifts at a local clinic, taught myself back-end engineering between meds and meals. No one asked. No one noticed. By 27, I had built a small freelance career. By 29, I was running supply chain logistics for 3 rural counties. By 32, I was brought on as lead infrastructure engineer for a federal emergency response contract. I worked behind a firewall, both literally and emotionally. I've written systems that moved masks, oxygen, vaccines, even food. From warehouses no one heard of, to towns no one visits, and every time the shipments arrived, some local mayor took the credit. Some press release named community coordination as the hero. I never minded. I wasn't doing it for applause. I was doing it so no one else would have to sit in a silent hospital hallway and beg for a bed like my father did. Last year, Mom called me crying because the roof was leaking. Brian offered to look into it. I paid the contractor in full, quietly, through her account. She thought it was a family friend helping. This year, Ethan got into college. Brian said he'd cover the rest after scholarships. But he didn't, and I did. Again, behind the scenes. Because what else are silent daughters good for? Julian didn't ask questions, he just showed up. Sometimes with a box of lemon bars from his sister's bakery. Sometimes with a busted laptop that just happened to crash during updates, just so we'd have a reason to talk. He never pried, but he paid attention. One evening, as we reviewed logistics routes for incoming shipments, he looked up and said, "You ever wonder what it'd be like if your work had a name on it?" I shrugged. Names don't matter, uptime does. He smiled. Still sounds like someone who deserves more than a first name no one remembers. I didn't need flowers, or praise, or grand speeches. I just wanted someone to notice that I was holding the world together while being written out of the story. Julian noticed, and sometimes, one person seeing you is enough to stop you from vanishing. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I did. After the graduation party, I had left my scarf behind. I came back quietly through the side entrance. The patio door was open. Brian was on the phone, probably with his wife. He was laughing. "No, she's harmless. She just likes to feel useful. Let her think she's helping. Throw her a bone now and then. She'll fund the whole damn thing." I stood there frozen, not because it surprised me, but because it didn't. That's what hurt the most. It wasn't betrayal. It was confirmation. They didn't respect me. They used me, and they expected me to be grateful for the scraps of pretend affection they tossed my way. I didn't say anything, didn't walk in, didn't grab my scarf. I just turned and walked back into the night air. Something in me shut off, and something else turned on. That night, I logged into my accounts. I revoked the cosign on Mom's credit card. I froze the backup funding on Ethan's tuition. I rerouted the emergency repair fund that had been quietly covering their home insurance for 3 years. I didn't leave a note, didn't call, didn't explain. Let them wonder what happens when the harmless girl takes her name off everything they forgot she paid for. A week later, I got an email. A senior infrastructure director at a federal agency had read my white paper. He wanted me to fly to DC for a private briefing. I said yes. Not for the title, not for the spotlight, but because maybe it was time. Time for the world to see what I'd built, with no one clapping and no one watching. I told Julian I was leaving for a few weeks. He didn't say much, just nodded and handed me a little envelope. Inside was a folded note. "Build it, even if they never thank you. The right ones always know who kept the lights on." For the first time in years, I wasn't just moving supplies. I was moving forward. And this time, I wasn't going back to being invisible. Washington, D.C. wasn't in the plan. But I packed my bag anyway. 2 dresses, 1 blazer, and the drive to finally step into a room where I didn't have to shrink to fit someone else's expectations. The briefing was quiet, 12 people in suits, a whiteboard, and a 5-year plan to rebuild rural medical infrastructure across 8 states. They asked who designed the foundational system that kept their supply lines alive during the second wave. I raised my hand. For once, I didn't wait for permission. 2 weeks later, I was listed as lead technical advisor on a nationwide resilience task force. My name was printed, spelled correctly, with a title attached that even Brian couldn't make a joke out of. Then came the article. "The woman behind the network. how Emily Tran quietly held the Midwest together. A regional paper ran it first, then NPR picked it up. Then Forbes. I didn't send it to my family. I didn't have to, they saw it. The same way they used to see Brian in his lab coat, except this time. They saw me. When I came back to Cedar Falls, Julian met me at the logistics center. Same flannel shirt, same calm eyes. He didn't say congrats, didn't ask for details, just handed me a thermos of tea and said, "So, now they know." "Maybe," I shrugged, "but that's not why I did it." He nodded. Exactly why it mattered. A few days later, the local school board called. Ethan, my nephew, had been selected for a new scholarship. Turns out, the system I helped redesign had improved student data integration, triggering better eligibility tracking. Brian sent me a text. "Did you have anything to do with this?" I typed, "Not really." Then deleted it, typed again, "Everything." Then hit send. I never needed the spotlight, but I did need the truth to breathe. And now that it had, I didn't care who clapped, because the work spoke louder than their applause ever could. It started with a voicemail from Mom. Her voice was tight, not angry, just unsure. "Emily, I know we have. Your father's in the hospital again. We didn't want to bother you, but we could use help, financially." I didn't answer right away. I sat with it, stared at my ceiling fan turning in lazy circles. Then I called the hospital directly, spoke with billing, covered what needed to be covered. But this time, I didn't hide behind her name. The bill said, "Paid in full, Emily Tran." Brian texted me the next morning. "We didn't know." I didn't know. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I replied, "You never asked." We sat at the dinner table a week later. No speeches, no sarcasm, just chicken, mashed potatoes, and awkward silence. Ethan finally broke it. "Aunt Emily, they said you're the reason I got the scholarship." I smiled. Maybe you just earned it and the system finally saw you." He looked at me for a long time, then said quietly, "Thanks for everything, I mean it." After dinner, Julian met me outside. He didn't need to ask how it went. He could read it on my face. "So, you done carrying them?" I shook my head. "I'm just done doing it in the dark." He held out his hand. I took it. "You know," he said, "they may never fully understand what you've done." "That's okay," I replied. "I didn't do it for their understanding. I did it for my own peace." They used to say I was the girl who never showed up. But I was always there. Behind the wires, behind the numbers, behind the scenes. Now I still show up, just not on their terms. And the best part, this time, I'm not walking in alone.